Visibility can be about safety. Now, for many of us, it goes back to experiences we had when we were younger, and being visible led to some type of situation where we were judged or maybe even shamed.
Welcome to Courage to be Visible, the podcast for heart centered entrepreneurs who are done hiding in the shadows and ready to step into the spotlight. I'm your host, Andrea Stenberg. I'm a video marketing strategist and a big believer that showing up as your true self is your marketing superpower. Hey, I'm so excited today. I'm speaking with Charisse Pierce, and she helps professionals make their success feel as good as it looks on the outside. So, Charisse, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So, I always start off these interviews with why do you think visibility is such a challenge for so many entrepreneurs?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there are many reasons, but the one I'll talk about is that visibility can be about safety. Now, for many of us, it goes back to experiences we had when we were younger, and being visible led to some type of situation where we were judged or maybe even shamed. Now, when that happens early on, we learn that being seen can be risky. And as a form of protection, we avoid putting ourselves in positions where that might happen again. Now, what's interesting is that for entrepreneurs and high achievers, that can show up as being incredibly capable and excelling at what we do while still being really hesitant to put ourselves out there. Now, I call that the let my work speak for itself syndrome, where we get so many things done and don't mind being recognized for our accomplishments, but we don't feel comfortable highlighting our contributions ourselves. And we're certainly not comfortable seeking the acknowledgement that we've genuinely earned in most cases.
And I think that's a trap that a lot of women fall into, in that if I do good work, people will just know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I think that, there's a basis for that. When we were younger, I'll speak for myself. When I was in school, I think that it was, I don't know, maybe I was maybe in the ninth grade before I made anything less than an A on my report card. So during that time, the work really did speak for itself, and we could count on that. And in that environment, that was true. And so most of us spend our formative years in school, and then we go out into the work world, the adult world. And while the work we do still absolutely matters, it often isn't enough on its own. We also have to learn how to let the right people see the value that we're adding.
Yeah, that is so true. I remember my first sort of professional post school career, and I was in corporate, and yeah, like I was used to putting my nose to the grindstone and doing the work, and then there were other people who spent more time on self promotion than actually doing the work, and they were the ones that got ahead, and it took me a long
Yes.
time to realize,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I have to tell, it's not just enough for me to do the work. I have to make sure people see that I'm doing the work
Yes.
as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so
Now,
true.
you said something early on that I'd like to go back to, is about like some of these early sort of traumas, or even just shaming. And sometimes they don't even have to be big traumas. Sometimes, it can be just as much as like one person laughing at you or putting you down can make you
Hmm.
feel like you need to be hidden to protect yourselves. Can you like
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that and what that's about?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that it was not always easy for me to be visible. But what was interesting about that is that I was often noticed even when I didn't want to be. So I'm 5'8". I've always been tall. I am, naturally reserved in my personality. So I tend to kind of quietly observe and get the lay of the land before jumping into new situations. So those two things alone made me stand out. And I didn't really fit the mold of the family and the community I grew up in. And to add to that, when I was a teenager, I went through a period of just not making the best choices, as we know teens sometimes do.
Yeah.
But as a result, for me, I became pregnant and got married at 16. So that was an experience that made me very visible within my community. And I was on the receiving end of some really harsh judgment, which led to me internalizing a lot of shame. Now, that, of course, was not the end of the story. I moved past that moment, but I carried with me an understanding of how risky being visible in the wrong ways could be.
So how does that kind of thing show up later in life? Like, this kind of being scared, like you've had an experience where somebody's shamed you or criticized you or whatever
Yeah.
for whether it's choices you've
Hmm.
made or even like you said, like being tall. Like I'm tall too, and I got
Yeah.
like all the hair or all the stuff.
Hmm.
And so
Uh-huh.
sometimes just being different, even just in a superficial way, can
Yeah.
make you stand out in an unpleasant way. So how does that show up now that we're adults and running a
Hmm.
business?
Hmm. Well, I will say this. Initially, for me, there was that tendency to, be really protective of what I was allowing others to see. And because of my height and my tendency toward being reserved, my appearance and my way of being in the world just didn't allow me to disappear like so many times I would have loved to. But over time I learned to embrace those things as best I could, by leaning into polishing my appearance, the way I spoke, the way I interacted with others. And most people thought I was really well put together, and they just had no idea of the shame that I still internalized. And since I wasn't eager to advertise that, I protected myself by showing up in ways that felt acceptably risky at that time, while I quietly continued to withhold the other parts of myself. So, to continue to answer your question, I think as far as career and later in life, I worked really hard at finding my thing. So in my early roles, I was recognized for my work because I took it really seriously. And I was given more and more opportunities, each with more responsibility. And eventually I built a career around that. And at that same time, ongoing ups and downs in my personal life reinforced that pattern of being selectively visible. But at this point, what feels really different is that visibility is no longer something that I feel is happening to me, whether I like it or not. It's a choice that I'm making intentionally in this season of my life. So, time and wisdom have given me perspective, and I no longer feel like the judgment of others define who I am. My own experiences give me so much to draw on, and they're what led me to launch my coaching practice, which gives me a platform and an opportunity to use what I've learned during my journey to support others in a really intentional way.
I love that one thing that you said about, visibility stop being something that just happens to you and it's something that you're doing intentionally. And
Yes.
I think that's really an important thing for entrepreneurs to say, okay, I'm choosing to do this and I'm choosing to do it in my way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that is it's a transition and it's a bit of a challenge, but it's really freeing when you can do that,
Mhm.
isn't it?
It is, and like I said, I think that that is some wisdom that comes with time and experience. But when you get there, it's so freeing, to your point, and it's just really a much better place to be in.
And I also think, like, I know for me, I went through this long period where like there was people who knew me as the mom, and probably some of
Hmm.
them didn't even know they knew my kid's name but not my
Yeah,
name. And there's other
yeah,
people who knew me as the wife, and there was like I had all these different hats that I was putting
mhm,
on, and it really took me a long time to like take all the hats off and say, okay, well, who is Andrea in
yeah,
middle age as an
yeah,
entrepreneur? And
hmm,
it takes a lot of work. And I also think it's something that's helpful to work with a coach on
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
helping you figure out who that grown-up version of you is and how you want to be, so that you don't always have to be the perfect polished whatever you think,
Yeah.
whatever people think you should be, and you actually get a chance to be who you are.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And a part of the work and the journey is figuring out who you are, especially at this season of life. You mentioned, being, older in an older season. And so I think that what happens for us is that who we are, when you were, more identified as the mom of, your son
Yeah.
or daughter, or the wife of whomever, or whatever that role was. That was something, like you said, that was more interchangeable like hats. But once you get to a point where maybe your children are adults, and so you're not identified so much by them anymore, or other things change in your life, maybe you were known by the job that you did and now you have a different one, or whatever the case may be. It's not just how others identify you, but how you identify yourself. And, again, that can change from season to season. So I think it's something that's work, and it's work that has to be done very intentionally in order to, identify that and really move into whatever we are in any given season.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I was say 20, I kind of thought like I'm 20, this is who I am, and it
Mhm.
was I think it was a little bit of a surprise to realize, you know what? No, like I've changed. Like
Yeah.
I may still have the same core values, but like,
Yes.
I've done more things, I've learned things, I've seen things. So of
Yes.
course I'm going to change, and that's
Yeah.
going to change how I show up. So I assume that's kind of how you work with clients, is helping them figure out who they are now and how that shows up in their life.
Absolutely. My work is really based on three pillars of clarity, balance, and alignment. And so that first pillar of clarity is all about figuring out the who am I now and what's important to me. A lot of my clients feel that something is off. They are successful on paper, but something just feels off. Maybe sometimes they know what it is, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, we start with getting that clarity. And even when they do, they may know what the thing is that feels off, but they may not know the reason for it. And almost 100% of the time, it's because the things that they're pursuing, the way that they spend their time and energy, doesn't really align with who they are and what's meaningful to them in that season of life. And to your point, it could have been meaningful, earlier in life when they set, sort of the cruise control on life. This was
Yeah.
the direction that they were pointed in, but things have changed, they've grown, and they need to revisit that.
Um, Now, when somebody comes to you with that and they're like trying to figure out what's the clarity, it doesn't always mean you have to blow up your life and completely change everything,
Oh,
right?
no. No, I mean, I would never recommend that anyone blow up their life and change things. That is usually not going to really get the result that they need. The first step is getting that clarity, and the second step is figuring out where, what in their life is already aligned with that clarity. That's where that alignment piece comes in. And then, sort of identifying the things that aren't, and then starting to whittle that down. And there are, I personally follow an 80-20 rule for myself. So if there's 20% of the things that maybe aren't in alignment, but I have reasons that I need to keep doing those things, I'm good with that. That's 20%. And I keep the 80% in alignment. But for the things that are not in alignment, if there's not a good reason to do it, then, we start to work through a plan of how do we, disentangle from some of these things with intention and with grace and without blowing up our lives. It's a process, but it's such a relief to clients just to even have a plan in place that, I can't tell you how much of a difference that just makes, just having the issue understood and having a plan to address it.
So is a lot of time, is it just like, I know for me, and I think for a lot of women, like they get so focused, there's the work, there's the kids, and you're doing all the things that you never do anything that's just for you. Is that part of that finding balance of finding something, even if you're still staying in the same career and you've still got the family, but like you said, they're grown up, they don't need you quite as hands on. Is that part of this balance, is finding some space or some interests, or even going back to interests and things that are just for you, even if it's not moving your career forward? Or
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for a lot of us at a certain point, there's not much of a desire to continue to move the career forward. Um, well, I won't say that there's no desire, but the desire to move the career forward becomes less of a priority than feeling balanced in their lives, right? So there's a lane for the career, and that's when we go back to the clarity piece and really outline, like, where is it that you want to go, with the career, and let's see, let's have that be one of the big rocks that we work with. But for the time that's maybe been freed up, and again, not just time but energy that's been freed up by maybe the fact that the kids are older, and that doesn't require so much time and energy, let's use that and apply that toward the other things that bring us joy and help us to feel balanced.
I think that is so important, but it's also like, it is a challenge because it's kind of like ebb and flow. Like, there are times
Hmm.
when you're busier, and times where you have more time to do those things. But I also think sometimes, like, we get into a rut of, okay, I come home, it's the end of the day, I'm going to watch TV, rather than, well, maybe you could, like, pick up a crochet hook, or
Yeah.
go out with a girlfriend, or
Yeah.
take a class for fun and things like
Yeah.
that. And
I,
so
I think it's important to be really intentional. And Andrea, let me also say that I think that this kind of work and exploration appeals to a certain type of personality. There are some personalities that are not really interested in pursuing, these kind of deeper meanings in life, and they feel perfectly happy to come home and, like you said, watch some TV and, just hang out, and they're not looking for something that adds deeper meaning for them. So this is more really geared towards those who are looking for that deeper meaning and want to continue to find it in ways outside of their work. For some, the work is all the meaning they need, and neither is wrong. It is just different ways of being in the world.
yeah, and so it's just those people who are feeling, like, there's something missing, there's something not right, there's something not, I'm not entirely happy with what's going on,
Exactly.
even though on paper everything looks beautiful.
Exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
do you ever find, like, the people, like, in your bio, it said, what you make their success feel as good as it looks. Do you ever have people
Mhm.
coming and saying, well, like, everything, why am I not happier when everything is going well? Like, do
Mhm.
they feel guilty over that?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a big part of it. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that guilt, especially if someone feels like sacrifices have been made, for them to have the success that they have. That's one really strong guilt trigger. And whether that's, some parent or grandparent or somebody who sacrificed to, pay for them to go to college and get their degree, or whether they feel like their family has paid by, time away, or whatever the case may be, they feel like they have to kind of stick to the course because sacrifices have been made. And, there's a breaking point where that stick to itness just doesn't work anymore. And they really feel like they have to, get more, just more in line with what they're feeling, so that what's outside and what's inside, matches up. So, but yeah, that guilt can be really a big obstacle to overcome.
Well, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I think for a lot of people, and I think particularly, like, if you're already successful and you're having some of these struggles, you feel like maybe you're the only one, because part of that thing of, I'm on paper, I look good, I'm polished, everything's working, and I'm still not happy. Nobody else is talking about it, and so you feel like you're alone and there's something wrong with you, when really
Yeah.
there's lots of people who are in that place.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this goes back to what we were speaking about earlier as far as judgment, too, because that's a piece of it. People feel like if I do change something, what will people think, especially if, again, someone has sacrificed for me to have this success and now I don't want it anymore, or I've needed to look differently than it does now. What will people think? And they get locked into that fear again of being judged. So that can absolutely cycle around again. I want you made me think of a TV show from like the early 2000s that was called Girlfriends. I don't know if you ever heard of it or not, but it was about these four young adult women. They had their professional careers they were pursuing. One of them was an attorney and seemed to be very successful. And at some point in the show, she just quit being an attorney and went and like started managing a club or something. And I remember thinking at the time, oh my gosh, that's so crazy. Why would anybody do that? She's an attorney. And, but I've thought about that a lot in recent years. Again, that show was in the early 2000s. And I've thought about it a lot in recent years because it exactly, really it's a rather extreme, case, but it really exemplifies, what I'm hoping to help people do, get their inside to match the outside. So what I can see now looking at that, looking back on it, is that her success probably didn't feel as good as it looked. And she took some steps to get it there.
Yeah. Well, it's like I met a woman who was a tenured university professor. Like she had tenure and she quit everything to go and start a business that was something that she'd wanted to do forever, but because she had children and she had obligations, she needed the safe, secure job. And then she finally got to a place where, you know what, I need to do things for me. So yeah, so that is a case of sometimes blowing it up, but sometimes it can be small changes as well.
Yes. So, in most cases, it's the small changes mostly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it does. Yeah. There's sometimes just really simple changes can make a big difference in how you feel. So if somebody's listening to us and they're going, oh, you know what, that's me. That's me. I'm on the surface, I look successful, but I feel like there's something not right. And I don't have that clarity that Charisse is talking about. What should people's next step be?
Oh, wow. Well, Andrea, that is actually a great segue because I have a free gift for your audience, if that's okay.
Oh, perfect. That would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll share a link with you that you can add to the show notes, but it's for a short mini assessment and it's for anyone who's curious about their own clarity, balance, and alignment. So it takes less than 5 minutes to complete. I review each one personally and provide an individualized insight based on what's shared. So again, that's a free gift for your clients, and I'll share the link for that. But that's a great place to start to get some insights onto where, you are right now in your own journey of clarity, balance, and alignment.
All right. So that is so fabulous. Yes, I'll have the link for that short quiz in the show notes because I think that that's something really valuable that anybody can benefit from. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this has been a valuable conversation because I think, like I said, a lot of people have had, it doesn't have to be a massive trauma to have that fear and shame around visibility from something that happened when you're young. And I think just putting it out in the spotlight and letting people realize, oh, I'm not the only one is going to help them. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andrea. And if I could share one last thing, for anyone who is feeling the way that you just mentioned, I want those folks to know that they are in good company. Every person who appears to be comfortable with visibility has had their own journey to get there. And there's not one right way, to do it. So I'd encourage them to take any step towards becoming more visible and towards dealing with the situation, that has caused them to feel unsafe doing that. So just know any step that you take is a step in the right direction. You may have to try on some things to find out what fits you, and that's okay. But keep what fits, let go of what doesn't, and keep moving forward.
That's excellent advice. Thank you, Charisse. Thanks for listening to Courage to be Visible. I hope today's conversation sparked ideas for your own visibility. If it helped, please share this episode with a friend. Follow the show and leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps. For links, show notes, and free resources to grow your visibility, head over to the show notes or visit my website. See you next time.